Welcome, everyone, to the Ovis Live event. I'm Ovis Chief Correspondent Tracy Grant. If you haven't heard about Ovis before, Ovis is the future of news. We're working on building a trusted place that empowers everyday people to make the news trustworthy, verified, and accountable. We're in the testing stages of the world's only platform that will allow you to incentivize journalists to tell the truth and hold them accountable when they don't. Today's topic, copy editors. What is a copy editor and what role do copy editors have in stopping misinformation and fake news? Our special guest today knows a lot about copy editing. Her name is Emma Cobbs. She's currently the founder and senior copywriter and editor at Teckle Creative. And it's the best copywriting agency you've never heard of. Sorry about that, Emma. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Tracy.
Now, also joining us is the person who created Ovis, Linton Johnson. Linton's career spans 32 years as an award-winning journalist and communications executive. In December 2021, he made history by making Ovis the world's first blockchain-powered news network designed to incentivize truth-telling. So let's get started, you guys. Emma, we'll start with you. But before we do, just a reminder to our audience, if you're watching us live, you can use the chat or comment section to ask us questions. We've also put in the chat the link to Emma's LinkedIn profile. You can connect with her there. Okay, Emma, let's start with the basics. What does a copy editor do?
Right. Great. Thanks for asking. So to me, I think every copy editor has their own definition of their work, and I would quantify it as the last line of defense between when a piece is put together and when a piece is published. So you have copy editors to function as fact checkers sometimes, but mostly for style, clarity, content, and substance.
Now, what do you love about copy editing? I remember I took a copy editing course at Northwestern and I was miserable. It's so detail oriented, and I mean, it's very easy to miss, a tiny little mistake.
Exactly. I think that's a great point. And you bring up something that I think that's what all copy editors have in common. We are freaks when it comes to that kind of thing. We love to find those little inconsistencies, or sort of like a treasure hunt, right? Like errant comma, wrong capitalization, and we put it all together, and it's this sense of accomplishment when we're able to dig every little thing out. I think it is just like it's a mindset sort of thing. And I would say, yeah, the normal thing is to not enjoy that, but the copy editor thing is to really like to find those treasures, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Treasures? as a journalist, that doesn't feel like treasure to me. It feels like scrutiny.
I mean, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No. I mean, what Linton is saying is right in some ways. When I worked at the Boston Globe, I was very grateful for the copy editors, but sometimes I felt like, oh man, I should have caught that myself. Now I feel kind of dumb. They think I'm stupid.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I never think negatively of the writer. I consider my role is to uplift and polish everything they've worked so hard to put together. And as someone who's also a writer, I know how much work it is for an article, find your sources, interview your sources, put the story together, make it a narrative. So if you forget a word or you need some help with the syntax, my pleasure.
Okay, I like that attitude. I mean, she's a journalist as well as a writer as well as a copy editor, so she gets it. So that makes sense. That makes
exactly.
Yeah, now, it's not like a professor with a ruler about to,
No, never.
Comma.
But you can't tell me you guys don't go out for coffee and go, can you believe the way
he missed a comma? How dare he?
Okay, so how does a person become a copy editor? I mean, obviously, just in case there are people who are watching who don't know this, a copy editor is obviously a journalist as well, for the most part. You have to have that same background, but there are other steps that you take to become a copy editor.
Yes. So there are no real official nationwide, what's the word, qualifications to become a copywriter. It's kind of like, it's pretty unregulated, but if you want to become one, I mean, I think my path is similar to many others. You start with the writing, and then you are given the chance to perhaps do some editing. And then if that's what you want, ultimately, you take more and more of these editing jobs or editing responsibilities. But I find that the clearest path from, point A to copy editor is to start by demonstrating your understanding of how a piece should come together and your appreciation for another person's voice, right? Because I think there's that matter of ego. What happens with some copy editors is that they try to inject their own narrative, their own style, when really I think the best copy editors, they don't have their own voice. They are able to seamlessly adapt to every piece and just uplift, like I said before, the author's original intent.
And I just want to add this. Everybody out there, if you are watching us live on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter, to follow us, you can follow us and like us. You can ask us questions using that chat or comment section. Emma, would be glad to answer any questions that you have, and LinkedIn also about Ovis. So, all right. So what qualities make for a great copy editor? I mean, a lot of us have seen old movies about journalism, and you think of that grizzled old guy, with the coffee in his hand and the cigar. That's not really what copy editing, the average copy editor is really like these days, right? You have young people, old people, women, men.
Yeah, not so much. I haven't seen many cigars in my time as an editor, but it is such
They
a
might have gotten rid of that in the newsroom at this point, right? No more.
Right.
No smoking.
Yeah, it's funny because there are so many stereotypes that persist. For like the male copy editor, it's the guy chomping on his cigar, and for the female, it's the sort of like school marm, like, well, you forgot this and you need to do that. And that's never been my experience, thankfully. I would say that the best qualities of a really great copy editor, it's that appreciation and understanding of the original intent of a piece, right? Whether it's investigative or human interest, or maybe you're editing, someone's essay work or creative writing. The point, I think, like someone who's really good at what they do is they take the time to appreciate and understand the original message and the original style of the author, and just polish up everything that's there, carve away what's not needed, and think of the reader as well, who is going to be appreciating and taking in this piece, and tool it to make it more digestible to them.
And that's the thing also, is that a copy editor isn't just looking for grammatical mistakes. They're also trying to help you in many ways, focus what you've written. You might have questions about, well, I don't know if this part makes any sense, or maybe, I mean, this woman sounds great. Is there any more from her? Like that type of stuff, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I think that, it would be the bare minimum of a copy editor is grammar, syntax, things like that, structure. But I feel like the part that's more difficult, the part that I am honored to cultivate over my years of copy editing, is to get the flow and make the flow better, and to collaborate with the writer or the journalist to make it a piece that sends the message they want to send, appeals to the audience they want to appeal to, and can just like stand the test of time as something that can be shared over and over again.
Okay. So in order to help the journalist do that, are there particular courses that you took just for this to become a copy editor?
So no, I have never taken, my whole life I've been an autodidact. It's funny. I prefer to learn on the job. And that's been true of really every role I've had. And while I can't recommend any specific courses, but what I can recommend is to find a mentor who is on the level, someone you admire, someone who is doing what you do in a way that you want to do it, and figure out a way to get under their wing and learn as much as you can from them, and kind of keep that mindset as you go that you will always be learning, especially because, you know, if we have that model of appreciating the author, every new piece you work with is going to have a voice you've never heard. And so there is that sort of constantly learning mindset.
Mm-hmm. And I have to say, what's different, I worked in both print and TV, and what's different about that is that, you know, in TV, you interview that person on camera, it's kind of over. You know, you write the story, you really can only use what you have. So I used to have a manager at my last TV station who would say, oh, well, why don't we do this and that and that? And you're like, I don't have the video for that. I don't have the quotes for that. Like, I get what you're saying, but you can only shape something so much after you've already shot it all. You know, with print, it's different. You can still go back and shape and ask more questions, right?
Yes, agreed. Yeah, there is much more. I think that's where things can really go awry. You know, it's like, you can only add so much to a story before it becomes this like gross soup. You know, you have to know when to stop.
Gross soup. I like that.
Gross soup, yeah. You mean it was just convoluted with all kinds of nuttiness in there? Yeah, okay, I understand.
Exactly.
That's basically how I cook soup just at the beginning. Because I'm a terrible cook. By the way, Emma, if you don't know, is an amazing cook. She actually writes about cooking. And I've read a couple of her stories about cooking, and it just, the way you use words make me go, oh my God, I can taste this soup. It is so amazing.
Mm-hmm.
The way I use words, it's like putting lipstick on a pig.
Oh, no.
That's the way I
terrible. Yeah, right.
Oh, I love it. Oh, thank you so much, Linton. Yes, in my previous life, I was a chef in New York. So for a few years, yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's another thing I fell into. Didn't take any courses, just kind of walked into a restaurant and said, can I do this?
Wow. I didn't even know that was a thing. I watch Hell's Kitchen. It seems very hard to get a job as a
Yes, if you're willing to do all the work that other people don't want to do, you can work anywhere. So.
That's true.
That's a good point.
Also, I'd like to remind people again out there, we really want to hear from you. If you're watching us live on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, follow us, and also, you know, ask us some questions using the chat or the comment section. Now, Linton, I'm sure you want to jump into this discussion, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, one of the things that I presume is that as a copy editor, you have a set of guidelines for that particular newsroom or whatever, or if it's not a newsroom, it's the place that you're copy editing for. And you're expected to know those guidelines. So it's not like you don't have any experience per se, but you have to learn the manual for that particular organization. Is that correct, Emma?
Yes, I would say it can be, that's a great analogy. It could be extended to any workplace. Everyone has their own style. Every place has their own style and their restrictions and how they've done things. So that's absolutely something that you have to be aware of, especially when you go from maybe one newsroom to the next. It won't necessarily be a one-to-one translation there.
Well, I'm glad you pointed that, because one of the things that we're trying to do at Ovis is standardize that process. What does copy editing look like? And this is a community-driven process whereby, you know, in most newsrooms and other organizations, it's, you know, copy editing and the standards are created by a select few folks without much input. All of our stakeholders at Ovis, including the people who are just average news consumers, get to participate in developing the standards for what editing is. So one of the things that Tracy and I love to joke about is the Oxford comma.
Oh, here we go.
Yes.
Here we go.
Here we go. So, Emma, this is a test for you, but, you know, just for those who don't know what an Oxford comma is, it's when you have a series of things like he's colorful, charming, and beautiful. Describing myself, of course.
Yeah.
And then
I knew what you were going to say.
And the comma goes before the and, you know, and beautiful. So the Oxford comma goes before the and. In other newsrooms, they don't like the Oxford comma.
Mm-hmm.
So
where do you fall on
Yes,
this?
where do you stand on the Oxford comma, Heather? You might end this broadcast early if you don't agree with Linton and Tracy.
It's funny. I'm not sure. I was never a proponent of it.
Oh, yes, right answer. That's just about to say, but now I've learned to become one.
Yeah. I mean, I find myself using it when I, write just emails and things like that, without even thinking, it just appears. And it's something that, of course, when I'm editing, I'm in a different mode. But it's like, do we really need this?
No, we don't.
No, we don't.
We don't need that comma. We don't need that comma.
Case closed. We figured it out.
Yeah. But it's for people just understanding what in AP style, which is a style of writing, it doesn't require the Oxford comma. And I think a lot of it has to do with you have only a certain number of characters in which you can tell a story. So an extra comma, if not necessary, takes up a character, which could, provide space for an apostrophe, which is definitely always necessary when it's possessive or whatever. So they always take it out. And so it's just funny because Tracy and I, that Oxford comma is a source of wars, literally wars in the newsroom over these Oxford comma. But going back to Ovis, it'll be a community decision that I can only hope the community understands using the Oxford comma. But this is where we want to get the community involved. Because we want to make everything as transparent as possible in Ovis and really having community engagement. So we have all the buy-in, we all agree on the same rules, versus having a newsroom where you don't really understand why the decisions are being made and you have no input on it and there's no accountability for it. So that's one of the big things that we're going to try to change. So that way we have not just transparency in the way Ovis works, but buy-in as well. So anyway. Question I do have, one reason we invited you on the show is because you're also very skilled at making sure stories that people write have the right words to generate more clicks. So how do you do that? Like, how did you learn that kind of SEO, search engine optimization, and what words do what, and why did you have to learn that?
Right. So I actually came into the whole world of SEO sort of through a backdoor. That mentor that I mentioned, it's important to have one of mine. I was doing some blog writing for one of her clients years ago. And that's when I started to appreciate the purpose of SEO and like how to use it strategically. And she introduced me to a few tools that she uses and some that I still use today, like keyword aggregating tools and what's the word that shows you the statistics behind, it's really interesting to appreciate like how a word performs basically when you see like its weight. I think different tools say different things, but sometimes the difficulty of use, the weight, the power. And it was like a whole other level because I had been just writing up to that point. But then to add this layer of SEO and strategy to it was quite a learning curve, I would say, for me. And it's something that to this day, it's evolving all of the time. And I notice, as someone who also consumes news as a human, that some words get overused or some things, become like, just to grab people's attention. And to me, it's very obvious, but it's something that like, I can't help but notice.
Can you give us an example of a word that is, SEO powerful and, it's overused that we should like, it's like when we see that word, we're like, oh, that's clickbait. That's not really news. What's something like that?
The latest one, I'm so glad thank you, Linton, because it's been driving me nuts and I've wanted to talk about it.
Let's do it.
It's actually a 2-word phrase. It's game-changer, game-changing, game changer. I've noticed it more and more and more lately. So I went into my little, back-end tool to see how it was performing. And it's so funny as a word is used more, the strength goes down. And, that makes sense, right? Like it's weakened, it's denatured. But there was a point where all sorts of websites, no matter who their audience was, were trying to say game-changing casseroles, game-changing like everything was like, or a game-changing life hack. It was just, it's been everywhere. It's starting to go down, thankfully, because not everything can be a game changer. I'm sorry, but it's one of those, like, it's like such a big word. Like before game changer, there was epic meals, epic trips, epic journeys, epic, and so it's it's a really big word that's used eventually for just anything, like.
Mm.
Wow.
That was a game-changing example. What you did. So epic. Well, speaking of, though, I mean, think about that. People are looking at these words and they're writing them in because they want to get copied. Does that sometimes change the way information is relayed so it's not truthful? And, do you think that the unscrupulous copy editors will let these words go through in lieu of truth telling?
So I think that's fascinating. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so glad we're talking about this. I think, first of all, it depends on the outfit you are writing for, because there are some, and I'm not about to call anybody out, but there are some institutions or outfits that really want attention more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And so the things that come out of an institution like that would be, I would say, just softer or weaker, not so much strong on the facts, but more on the emotion, or more on trying to like the hyperbole, like this is the best version, or this is the worst thing that's ever happened in this area, or just to kind of get that sort of gut. What do you mean? I need to read this story. What is the worst thing that's ever happened in this area of Ohio? Something that it's not necessarily true if you read the whole article, but I found that a lot of the time, the words used are just not, they're more emotional based than facts based.
Well, that's interesting. When we went to Indiana to kind of talk to people about a survey, the Gallup survey that came out in September, that said that only 7% of people fully trust the news media. That means 93% of people don't trust the media or has some sort of distrust in the media. And when we were interviewing people, one of the things they said is, I'm sick and tired of these crazy headlines that suck you in only to get to a story that doesn't match the headline. And that, they do this emotional play on you, and then they don't back it up with any facts or any information. So this is really what's happening, Emma. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. I can't tell you the number of times, and I'm not even talking about hard news or journalism, just in the average article that gets pushed to you if you're scrolling through, let's say, Facebook or any website really, that's saying, you'll never, I mean, this is on the really, really dumb side, but like, you'll never believe what this man did when his wife,
right.
And then it's just unrelated, or, it's really trying to get you to click on something to ultimately be served an ad. I really don't think anyone's caring about whether or not you read the article. It's just to push through, another link, which contains an ad, which gets them 5 cents or 2 cents,
oh my God.
Right.
So
I have a friend, actually, I was talking to him about this the other day. I was reading this article and I said, oh my gosh, you have to read this. You'll laugh. They totally bachelored this article. And he was like, bachelored? And I was like, well, when you watch The Bachelor, every time it starts, they go, in the most dramatic episode of The Bachelor. Every single time. And they do it so much that even the host now kind of jokes about, in the most dramatic episode. And so the headline that I saw, I was like, they bachelored this thing. And when you read the rest, it's like, nothing in the story has anything to do with this article. Like, it's so hyperbolic that it's ridiculous, So yeah, that's exactly, I believe that's exactly what you're talking about.
You are spot on, Tracy. It is sometimes, most of the time it's very entertaining, but sometimes it's like, geez, I mean, what is going on,
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I'm sorry.
Well, my question.
Mm-hmm.
No, go
no,
ahead.
I interrupted you, so I was saying go right ahead. Sorry about that.
Okay. Okay, so my question is, then how do you balance clicks and ratings with being factual in your copy editing? Because you have to get, at least in this current paradigm of clicks and ratings, you have to get the clicks for people to read your stuff. How do you do that?
So, if I had a foolproof way of doing that for everything I edited, I think I would be making a lot more money these days. But it really is a case-by-case sort of a thing. And the main axiom, if I can say, that comes to mind is there's usually a better word or a stronger word, meaning on the SEO side of things is what I mean. And so you can present facts in a way that is actually engaging if that's what you care about. So I think that
Right.
most of the time it's definitely possible to tell a factual story with emotional impact. It really depends, if you do want to just put together a bunch of listicles, that's a whole other ballgame. But, we're talking about journalism here. It's absolutely, I think it's just, I personally think it's kind of in that pipeline of, well, we need better writers to make better product, to make more clicks. And so what ends up happening, I think, is some institutions cheap out on the writers. They get a cheap, watered down product. No amount of editing can save it. So they just stuff it with as many buzzwords and things that they can and hope it performs well.
Mhm. And
Well, one
just so
thing I was
people out
gonna
there know, you said listicle. Just if you can explain what this is,
Oh, yeah.
because people see it all the time and probably don't even realize there's a name for that.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. So you've probably seen them. BuzzFeed traded on those for years. Top 10 ways to surprise your boyfriend. I'm not making this up, or like top 10 vacation destinations. And some listicles were like top 45. They would get really, really, really big.
Oh
But the
my
idea was
God.
to just make you scroll, so you would kind of get to
Right.
the end and not really learn anything, but you would be like, okay, well, I read that,
Yeah, and then every time you scroll, there's an ad. So I see.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, every time you click the next item in the list, there's an ad. So now they got collect another 3 cents
Right.
or whatever. Wow.
But I really do want to know the 38th best scene in, all Star Wars movies. Like, let me just keep going.
Right. 50 best bagels you need to eat before you die. Something like
Right.
Well, I'll tell you how I think we at Ovis are solving that problem. It's because we're incentivizing truth telling. And so the way we do it is we crowdfund a story. So the story doesn't need any ads. So we don't have to create these crazy headlines to draw you in so you can click on an ad because the story is already funded. Right now in the current clicks and ratings world, the story gets out there and it hopes to use the ads to pay for the cost of writing that story. And so that's why everything is all crazy. Well, the money's there up front through our crowdfunding platform. The story is already funded. The story is written. It's verified by multiple fact checkers, and it goes through the copy editor, who can now just focus on the copy editing, making sure it lives up to the community standards. It's not worried about having to try to figure out, is this story going to get ratings and clicks? Because that doesn't matter as much anymore. In fact, it's a secondary thing versus a primary thing for some organizations that are really mostly worried about ratings and clicks before they're worried about the truth.
No, I agree. I've actually stopped most of when I used to write, blog things, long form content, things like that. I found that it was often an unreasonable demand to demand pieces that were well written, easy to read, interesting, but also somehow magically could make thousands and thousands of people want to read them. It's sort of like you can't always do both. You can't have something be super buzzworthy and a longer piece. It's been a real challenge, I think, in my line of work.
When you were talking to us a little bit earlier, you were saying about how this has gone to the extent where organizations will steal copy from Reddit and turn it into their own. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, absolutely. So there is a definite pipeline of, that sounds so tinfoil hatty, but I mean, there's a there's a pipeline from Reddit to, news aggregate sites to actual news outlets. So what happens is that on Reddit, if you're not familiar, the best way to think of it is a big open forum. People will post topics to discuss, other people will comment, sub discussions will be generated from those comments. And so what happens is that wholesale entire comments, which can be sometimes very long, will be copied and pasted into either group pieces, like 10 examples of terrible relationships, or this man went through this thing, you'll never believe what happened. And then sometimes an MSNBC or a yahoo.com will find that, will take that and turn it into a story on their own. And then so when you go back and you trace it to OP, in this case, original poster, they either don't know this is happening, they find out one day when they're on Yahoo and they're reading about themselves, but they're never contacted or compensated or anything. It's gotten to the point that I've noticed some accounts, they're dummy accounts, they're made by reporters who will ask a question like, what happens at your job when you say you want to quit? Tell me a crazy story. And it turns into an article because they are posing as someone who's just curious when they really want to create an article out of what people are saying.
Right.
Wow,
and Reddit
so
does sometimes crack down on that, or at least they try to. They'll send I've seen this before where they'll like take down your post and say, oh, this is advertising or commercial or something like that. But they can't get it all,
Absolutely not. It's way too big. Yeah. And it's just, how do you know someone, versus another just saying, tell me a story about your favorite dinner to make on a weeknight. And, it can be innocent, but it can also really be, because what I failed to mention before is when you take those stories from other people and you don't compensate them, you don't go back to them, you are profiting off of them because you are now putting it on your site, which has ads and which has traffic of its own, and then talk about the ethics behind that. There's none, I think,
There's none. You're taking somebody else's life experience and turning it into a moneymaker for yourself without compensating that. That is stealing, in effect. That is literally stealing. Which, one of the things that we're trying to do at Ovis is that when a journalist and a fact checker and an editor and the person who comes up with the story idea, when they create that story, because of the technology that we use, for those of you who want to nerd out, the blockchain technology used, it's recorded and we know exactly who owns that piece of information. So if somebody wants to use that information, it's effectively copywritten on the blockchain, on the technology that we use. And so we know exactly who created it. So if somebody wants to steal it, that the group of people who created that article can go after the person who stole it, because they can prove without a shadow of a doubt that this is their information. Furthermore, and so for those of you who understand what NFTs are, they're an original piece of work. A lot of people have heard about that. But we create basically a copyright that if someone starts to use your information again on follow-up stories, then they actually have to pay the copyright holders a royalty basically for using that information. So for fact checkers and editors and for journalists, when they come to Ovis, the wonderful thing about that what we're trying to do is that you're going to continue to not only get rewarded for the original story, but if people use the original story as the basis for their follow-up story, you continue to get rewarded with royalties. Unlike in this current click and ratings world where they're stealing your ideas and profiting off of your stuff, we're trying to restore public trust in media and really give editors and copywriters and journalists and fact checkers a chance to have a really good living because they're going to get rewarded constantly for their work.
Mm-hmm. Now, let me just say one more time, because we're going to be wrapping it up soon. But if you're out there right now and you're watching us live on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter, it's not too late. You can still ask us a question using the chat or the comment section. So just so you guys know before we wrap it up. But, I have to say, when I worked at the Boston Globe, after I left is when this happened. There was a columnist who he was very popular with the readers. He wasn't a very nice man, but it turned out that people found out that he had been making up things for decades in his column. His columns were always like, I happened to overhear the police chief say, and I was always like, how did you overhear that? Where were you that you always overhear everything, and but I was young, so I didn't really question it when, back then when I would say that. But then a couple of years later, it turned out, we all found out he wasn't overhearing things, he's making things up. And because he was a veteran journalist, nobody ever questioned him. I'm not even sure that the copy editors I kind of felt like the copy editors were a little bit afraid to ask the questions because not only was he so, he was a veteran journalist, but he was very popular. Readers loved him. Like he was kind of getting away with it because people weren't really jumping in there. And
They weren't holding him accountable.
yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what Ovis is trying to stop, right?
Yeah, I mean, so great analogy, Tracy. The idea is that even on the Ovis platform, whether you're a journalist, a fact checker, a copy editor, you have to put down a little bit of money certifying that this work that you're doing is verifiable, accountable, and true. And if someone challenges you on it and they can prove that you're purposely spreading misinformation, like this guy at the Boston Globe, they can take away all their money. Today, that just almost rarely happens. I was looking at a story the other day for a person who had all unnamed sources and accusing, there's an Alameda County DA, Pamela Price, who was being accused by this so-called journalist that people in her office were unhappy and what have you. Well, in every office, people are going to be unhappy. Right. But there are also people who are also happy. But they only wanted to go after the side of the people who are unhappy for obviously ratings and clicks. But everybody was unnamed. And then they started quoting unnamed sources. And you kind of think to yourself, well, if you're not going to be transparent about who you're quoting, then how can I even believe that that person that you quoted is for real? Are you just making this up? Kind of like the Boston Globe person? It just makes you skeptical. And what we're trying to do at Ovis is really create transparency and hold people accountable, hold journalists accountable. So we don't have like a Boston Globe situation like you had, or in this case, this horrific, in my opinion, piece of quote unquote journalism that was clearly slanting this DA. I mean, I can't support these journalists, these so-called journalists that are out there that use the power of anonymity and that type of thing to attack anybody, regardless of whether I believe in the politics of that person. I just don't think it's fair, and it really hurts journalism. And Ovis, we're trying to restore public trust in journalism so everybody gets a fair shake, and it's transparent and it's accountable.
Mm-hmm. Emma, what are the rules you follow in terms of anonymity? I mean,
right?
Without being able to quote anonymous sources, I mean, we never would have had Watergate, right? We wouldn't have found out what happened there. But there are ways to abuse that power as well.
Absolutely. This is one of the issues that I feel out of place and in place talking about, because I wasn't there when the journalist found these sources or talked to these sources, and in that case, I don't necessarily feel it is my place to maybe question them. But there have been some stories that have come across my desk, some pieces where I have detected a very, like as Linton just pointed out, very negative slant. And at that point, I have gone back to the writer or the journalist and asked them just some questions, because again, I don't want to overstep. I don't want to misinterpret. Just what exactly, what is the message you're trying to send here? How can we clarify? How can we convey what you're trying to say, or what you think the story is? And there have been a couple of cases where it's undergone a significant makeover, for lack of a better word, before it's come back to me again. But it's felt a lot of the time like a losing battle, because I can't make someone be honest. All I can do is make their story sound as good as it can. And so having something, I think, that really focuses on accountability and doesn't put it on me, an editor, to try to make sure someone's not lying, I think that's a great thing.
Well, I can tell you, in like at Northwestern, where Tracy and I both graduated from, and in many newsrooms, the ethics is if you're going to use anonymous source, you have to have 3 on-the-record sources that back up that anonymous source, or be able to prove the information that the anonymous source is talking about. So if the anonymous source says X, Y, and Z is corrupt, then you can't just say that. You actually have to go investigate that information and have 3 independent verifications about that corruption. and three people go on the record, or three documents that show that, and then you can use the anonymous source, because the anonymous source is basically just adding color to the facts that are already there. But for someone just to say the person is corrupt and you just write that would be a no-no. That would be against our ethical guidelines, because you're just using an anonymous source that could have been made up, and there's no way to prove it. And so you need to have, in an ethical newsroom, at least 3 ways to back up what the anonymous source says that is on the record.
Yeah. I feel like it's getting looser and looser, not to be all dramatic about it, but the strictures have gotten very, very loose, and especially in softer, all of us have read like a page 6 piece where it's sources close to Madonna have said
Right.
she's a wizard, like it's just, and then people just take that as fact. But I think that if you're going to call it journalism, hold it to a standard, because if one person can just claim things, as in your example, Linton, and just say, well, I know that this is true because this person said so, and I don't need to tell you.
Right.
Yeah.
What are we doing?
Yeah. That's shoddy. That's not even journalism. That's just blogging and gossip. That's the word. It's gossip.
Right. Right.
Gossip.
And sometimes just fairy tales, which I learned at the Boston Globe. But may I say that guy was up for a Pulitzer Prize? That's when they realized.
Oh, that's right, he was.
Yeah. So
he never got it though, right?
That's when they started to figure out, Anyway,
wow.
We'll talk more offline. But that does it for us today. I want to thank our special guest, Emma Cobbs, for joining us. Emma, you were great today. Wonderful discussion. Remember, awesome. You can connect with Emma through her LinkedIn, and the link to her profile is right there in the chat. I also want to thank all of you out there for spending your Saturday with us. Please follow us on social by visiting our website at ovisnews.com. I'm Tracy Grant. Thanks for watching.